Welcome to Thames Side Brewery. My name is Andy Hayward. I'm the owner and head brewer here at Thames Side Brewery. We're based in Staines on the river, and it's the first time in 80 years there's been a brewery here. I'd like to tell you about the history of brewing in the area and of our formation, but first I'd like to show you around so you can see how things work. Thames Side Brewery is a small microbrewery with a capacity of 4 brewery barrels, which means that every time we brew we can produce 655 litres. Everything starts with the water, and the water has to be heated. This is a hot liquor tank which has a 1400 litre capacity, so that's heated up to the right temperature. We then pump the water into the mash tun and malt is added. Malt is barley that has been germinated to allow the starches to turn to sugar, and the sugar is what we need for the yeast to work on later in the process. So we are extracting the sugar from the malt by steeping it in the mash tun for an hour or so at a certain temperature. That allows the sugars to come out into the water, which we then pump off, and we take it through the underback, which allows me to check the strength and sweetness of it so that we know we've got the right amount of sugar for the yeast to work on later. We then pump it through the underback and up into the boiler, where we bring the temperature up to the boil. So we've turned on the boiler to start heating the water that's come through already. Meanwhile, there's still a lot of sugars left in the grain, so we do something called sparging, which is running water from the top of it through it, and we're running that off as we're running the water that's already in there through the underback and into the pump. So it's a continuous process. All of this is then going into the boiler, and when we finally got enough water and the strength is reduced so that we're just not getting too much sugar left, we know that we're at the right strength for the final beer. We then add the hops into the top of the boiler and boil it for an hour. The last 10 minutes we add more hops, which are for aroma. The first hops provide the bitterness for the beer, and the last 10-minute addition provide the aroma, which is what you smell when you take a drink of a pint of beer. And we then let the whole mixture sit for half an hour so that the last hops can actually just infuse their flavour without having it boiled away. At that point we then run the whole liquid through a heat exchanger to take basically almost boiling liquid through to a fermenting vessel at ideally about 20 degrees, which is the ideal temperature for the yeast to work, which then begins and turns the mixture, the wort, into alcohol. The process of primary fermentation takes between 3 and 7 days, depending on the type of yeast and the type of beer we are producing at that time. And at the end of 7 days, the primary fermentation is complete. We chill it and add dry hops for a further 3 days, which infuses it with a lot more flavour, and then we rack it off into casks where the secondary fermentation begins. And whilst it's in the cellar, the secondary fermentation gives the beer its condition, which is the natural carbonation you taste when you have a pint of beer.
Beer, please, Andy.
Yep, usual, Trevor?
Yes, please.
Here you go, a pint of white swan.
Thank you.
So as you've seen, we like to test and taste the beers before we release them into the market. We obviously don't want to have anything sold with our name on that we wouldn't be pleased to drink ourselves. So at the moment we currently produce 4 beers. We have an English ale called Harrier Bitter, which is a session beer. We have a Heron ale, Heron Bitter, which is a step up from that. It's still an English ale, very traditional Fuggles and Goldings hops, and that's 3.7%. The next one up in the range is 4% hoppy pale ale called White Swan, which is based on an American style pale ale. And then top of the range is the Egyptian Goose IPA, which is based on an old-fashioned English IPA recipe rather than the currently favoured American IPAs. So it's more like what used to be produced here by Ashby's, the last brewery that was working in Thames, which closed in 1936. They produced an APA, which is an Australian pale ale, which they advertised as like an IPA only with more body. So this is my attempt to recreate something similar to that. Staines was well known for both brewing and for mineral water production in the last couple of 100 years, because the water through the artesian wells was very pure, so it attracted a lot of mineral water makers as well as brewers, as I say. There were many breweries here, but the last one operating was Ashby's, which closed in 1936, and I'm the first brewery that's opened since then. So our Thames Side Brewery is the only microbrewery in the area and the first one for 80 years. So we are proud to be bringing brewing back to Staines, and would like to remain very much a local brewery. We don't want to get big, we just want to supply local pubs from here and in Staines, Egham, Chertsey, and maybe as far as Twickenham, Richmond, Kew, etc. But we don't want to be a massive brewery, just a small local brewery for local people. I started work in 1974 in insurance, and until last summer, over 40 years, had a career in insurance. But most of that time, since I was age 19 in 1978, I started home brewing. I always loved the traditional ales and liked the idea of tinkering with the ingredients to produce different flavours. So when I thought about the opportunity of turning it into a commercial venture rather than just a hobby a year or two ago, it seemed very appealing. Things have moved on quite quickly since then, and here we are. We had the launch in November 3 or 4 months ago, and now we're producing 4 beers.